Hello everyone, I hope you're enjoying this statistics course. By now it may be apparent to you that statistics is widely used from personal decisions to societal and political and economic research. And today we're going to show you how to use statistics through software. So far we've done our analysis by hand, and it is important that you understand the assumptions and the 6 different steps to hypothesis testing. But when you start dealing with large data sets, it is very, very difficult to do it by hand. And so there's software that helps us do this. And this is not the only software that's available, but SPSS is one of the most popular ones. It's been around for a while. And so I'm going to use this version that I have installed in my computer to help us analyze the data that will eventually be used for a writing assignment. Please note that this instruction is not for you to memorize or learn. You will not be tested on this. I simply want you to know how we got our results, where we got them from, and how we were able to set up our database. And so when you click on statistics, you basically end up having some type of spreadsheet that looks like this. Now I've gone ahead and I added the responses of all 66 participants. Now these participants came from my face-to-face stats classes that are meeting this fall, and I wanted them to be a part of the study, and I am going to show you what the survey was and how they answered it and the whole procedure. Now I am going to do this by starting off with a blank spreadsheet. And if you don't mind here, I'll just show you this here. When we start off and we don't have anything recorded there, we have to tell SPSS what we want it to do. And so you have 2 views. You have the data view, where you will enter the participants' responses, and then you have the variable view. Now, what we need to make use of to be able to set this up is our survey. And here is our social media survey, the one that I use to get participants to respond to social media. As you can see, I asked them for some basic demographics: age, gender, and ethnicity. Then after that, I asked them to use this social media usage scale using a Likert scale 1 through 5, and I had them respond to these 6 questions. Then I asked them to answer 2 more questions here, which was about how many hours they used social media per day and which social media accounts they have. At the end, I added up their score here, and that gave me some type of quantitative variable to see if their usage and maybe dependence on social media was higher or lower. This, if you for some reason don't know what we're talking about, is your writing assignment, which is due on October 3rd. And so you are to study social media usage and see if there are any gender differences with social media. This was your first discussion, so if you have no idea what this is, you can go back and assess that, or you could just keep watching the video, and this is what you'll have to do. Here's a class ID, here's a password you'll need to create and turn it in a common account, and you will then submit your paper in APA format. Here's the minimum requirements, and this information you'll eventually be able to fill out once we complete this SPSS analysis in here. So I go back to this in here. We have to populate our data variable by starting in order. So we'll do that in here. We'll go to age, and so what I have to do is I have to create an age variable, an age question. Then the second one is gender. You may remember that. And then it was ethnicity. And then it was social media uses. So I'll abbreviate so that we won't write everything. And then we had a question about how many hours they use social media per day. So hours, and I'll just put / per day. And then notice it gives us sometimes an error when you use an illegal character. In this case, it is the /, and so I'm going to have to use hours. And then I'll just put daily. And by the way, underscore is one way to put a space in there and for it to accept it. And last, it was how many accounts they have. So I'll put social media accounts. Now, before we proceed and go on to enter data, we have to tell SPSS whether we're dealing with a quantitative or qualitative variable. And so we'll start off with age, and we'll look at the level of measurement. And because age is a quantitative variable, then we'll use the only quantitative option we have here, which is scale. And then we have gender. Gender is not quantitative, it is in fact qualitative. Here you are given two options, nominal or ordinal. We know that gender is not ordinal because ordinal would imply that there is an order, and that would mean that one of the genders is superior to the other. So we're going to create a nominal variable, and whenever you create a nominal variable, you have to do something different, and that is that you have to add a value for it. So what I have to do here is I have to specify what I mean by it. And so I'm going to, since SPSS only speaks numbers and it doesn't speak words or full sentences, I have to tell it that female would be 1, and then male is going to be 2. Now, since it was open-ended and there may be people who don't identify as male or female, I will then say other. And so we will then leave a third option for those who may have, if any, identified as something other than male or female. When we look at ethnicity, we look at this specific one here, and that is the quantitative variable as well. And so we would eventually do nominal as well. And the reason, again, is because using ordinal would imply that one of the ethnicities is superior to the other. So we would go back and type in, and by the way, it's recommended that you do it in this order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to do that for African Americans would be 1, and then for 2, it would be American Indian, I think it is, yep, Indian or Alaskan. And you would go through all the way down. Now, notice that people may have identified as more than 1. And so if that's the case, not only do we want to have other, but we may want to have multiple. So if this would be 8, we would add 9 for a multiple. I'm not going to go through the rest of the list, but you could see the idea of that. Social media usage, is that a quantitative variable? It is, because we basically made them give themselves a score on each of these, and we are at the end are going to simply add up their score, and so that's going to be quantitative. We go back to hours daily. That is, again, that is a categorical or qualitative variable, and so we would then have a nominal or ordinal choice, but you have to understand that the way the question is worded, you have to make a decision. And you notice that A would be less, B would be more, C would be more, and D would be more. So even though this is categorical, there is a ranking, and so instead of choosing nominal for it, we're going to use ordinal. Again, since it's categorical, we have to define, and so the first one would be less than 1 hour, and then the other one would be, I think it's 1 to 3 hours, and so forth. And so you'd go down the list and you'd add them all. Last, we have to do social media accounts, and that's question number 8. And so we're asking how many, what social media accounts they have accounts or platforms, I should have asked. And so it is not ordinal because there's no ranking. We're not claiming that Twitter is superior to Snapchat, so we do nominal. And once again, we specify what we mean by 1. So I'm going to do an order. So Facebook would be 1, and then you would have Instagram as number 2, and so forth. And by the way, if people selected other, or if there were people that selected multiple, then we may want to create an additional value so that we could say that people had multiple. So just for the sake of this, I would create 6 for multiple for those who may have more than one account. And so we would then add that there, and we would now have our setup right here. You now have age, gender, ethnicity, social media usage, hours, social media account, and let's say that our first participant was 19 years of age, and it was a female, so we would select 1 because that's the number we got, and she happened to be American Indian or Alaskan, so that you may remember it was 2, and then her social media usage was, let's say, a 10, and hours daily, she reported 4 to 6, so that would have been, I think, option 3. And then social media accounts, let's say that she had multiple. So at that point, we would then select 6, and that's what these numbers would mean. Her age, her gender, ethnicity, and keep in mind this is all in numbers. You would do that for every single participant, and that would allow you to then do the analysis through SPSS. For the sake of time, as I said earlier, I've already added everything from all participants. And so now we are going to see how we can understand and make use of this data here. So the first thing I'd like to do is do the descriptives. And so you may remember that statistics is broken up into descriptives and inferential. So I would like to do the frequencies first. And so for the frequencies, we have to add all the categorical variables. You cannot do a frequency for a quantitative variable. So I've added gender, ethnicity, hours per day already to this in here. And I want to get a bar chart with percentage as the indicator. And so when I click continue, this allows me to then do an analysis here, and I end up with my output that is here. It tells me that we have a total of 66 people, and here it tells me the frequency and percentage of gender. We have 48 females and only 18 males. That's something to consider for your paper. Here's the ethnicity breakdown. Not surprisingly, thanks to normal distribution, we have 75% of the respondents be Hispanic. This is not surprising, as I said, because we are in Harbor College, which is a predominantly Hispanic serving institution, and that's just because of the area where we are. And so naturally, we're going to get more Hispanics than others. If this would have been the breakdown, and we were, say, somewhere in South Dakota where there aren't that many Hispanics, then this would be odd, and it would call some methodological processes into question. When we look at hours per day, we do the same thing here, frequency and percentage, and so you could figure out what's the most common of them all, and we find that 47% of the participants responded to using 1 to 3 hours daily. And then social media accounts. You have the majority of people, 86.4%, have multiple accounts. Here are the bar charts in case you wanted to display that. By the way, you don't need to attach these to your paper, but I just wanted you to get a visual representation of that. We then go on to do another aspect of descriptive statistics, and that is the descriptives. And here we're going to use the quantitative variables. So we're going to look at age and social media usage. We cannot do descriptives for categorical, and so when we look at, excuse me, the wrong one here. If we look at options, we are going to request for mean, standard deviation, minimum, and maximum. And so as we click on that, it will then give us a chart at the bottom providing you with the minimum and maximum age, as well as the average and standard deviation. Remember to always round up to 2 decimal places for your final answer. So it's 6.79 standard deviation, average age 23.12. Social media usage, the average is 17.33 with a standard deviation of 4.95. You could see that the minimum reported score was 7 and the highest was 30. And so this is descriptive statistics. Now that we've done this, we can now do the inferential statistics. And we're going to do a t-test because we're comparing genders on social media usage. And so we're going to look at our variable, which is social media usage, and we're going to group them by gender. And so you may remember it was female and male. By default, we have set up our confidence interval at 95%. Gives you the alpha of 0.05. And we are now going to run the analysis. And so here you have the t-test, the breakdown in usage by gender. Females used social media on average of 16.98. We're rounding to 2 decimal places with a standard deviation of 4.57. Males used, the average social media user score was 18.28 with a standard deviation of 5.88. And so we know there's a difference. Remember that in this case, based on the wording of it, if they agreed strongly to the statement, that means that they're using social media more. If they strongly disagreed with it, that means they're using it less or not at all. And so when we get a lower score, it actually means more usage. And so it seems as though females use it more. The big question is whether they use it statistically significantly more. So to answer that, we have to use our t-test. And so here you have the t, here you have your degrees of freedom, and here's your p-value, which is known as sig or alpha as well. And so we have two t's. We have this one and this one. We have 2 degrees of freedom, this one and this one, and we have this one and this one. How do we know which one to use? Well, you may remember that one of the conditions or assumptions for a t-test is homogeneity of variance. And what this test right here that's called Levene's test and SPSS does is that it measures to see if we have equal variances that are assumed. If it is, then we use the top one. If they're not assumed, then we have to use the bottom t and the bottom df and the bottom sig. How do we know which one to use? You have to look at this number. And so if this number were to be greater than 0.05, then we assume that they are equal, and you proceed with this one. Keep in mind that this is not looking at the sample size, it's looking at the variance. If it were to assume that they're not equal, then we have a problem somewhat, and SPSS tries to adjust that by modifying the t and the degrees of freedom and so forth. In this case, as we have a score that's greater than 0.05, we can proceed with using the top column. And so we find our t value is at 0.95, with our degrees of freedom being 64 and our p-value being 0.35. Now, in the past, you have determined whether you reject or fail to reject based on the rare and common zone. And so if you have less than 0.05, you already know, rule of thumb is you reject the null. If you have greater than 0.05, then you fail to reject the null. In this case, it tells you specific p-value, which is 0.35. 0.35 is larger than 0.05, therefore it falls in the common zone, and we failed to reject. We failed to reject the null. And so once again, just because I stuttered on this one, since it is greater than 0.05, this value here, then it falls in the common zone, and we failed to reject the null, meaning that there are no statistically significant differences in gender when it comes down to social media usage. This is going to be available for you, and you could listen to it as many times as you need to so that you could write your paper, and you will also have an output in PDF so that you can look at this in here. Please keep in mind that all this information will allow you to fill out the writing assignment checklist. And so you note that for the introduction, you need a minimum of 2 pages where you cite your 7 peer-reviewed research articles. The methods section, there's no minimum to it as long as it's necessary to properly describe the methods. I'm looking for clarity. And so you should be able to tell me how many men and how many women. Where do we get that from? Right here. We have number of females, number of males, and percentage and in frequency. How about average age and standard deviation? Here you have that information over here. Average age is right here. And standard deviation, always rounding to 2 decimal places. How about the ethnicity? I created this chart for you here, but I don't want the chart in there. I want you to narratively describe how many African American, how many American Indian. And I know it may sound repetitive, but you're simply going to give a breakdown of our participants' ethnicity, and maybe speak of why we have many more Hispanics than other ethnicities. At the end of the participants section, you are going to write this piece right here, and eventually you'll cite accordingly to that. When it comes down to materials, you have this to go by, and I will upload this also for you. You could describe it as best as you can, showing that there were a total of 6 questions for the social media scale, with a Likert scale of 1 through 5, specifying what 1 is and what 5 is, and also the few other demographic and other questions. In addition to that, you will describe the procedure. Please note that the procedure was participants were handed the social media usage test at the beginning of the semester, the 2nd week to be more precise. They were asked to fill out demographic questions first, and then they were asked to tell us about their personal social media usage. After they completed everything, they gave their papers to me, and I debriefed them on the hypothesis, which was that I was looking for gender differences. The reason why I didn't do it before is because I didn't want them to be biased or intentionally answer in a way that would be aligned with what they would like or are expecting to see. So at the end of the method section, you should do an analysis and make sure that every section is clear enough so that if I wanted to replicate the study or anybody else, they would be able to do so very easily because it's very clear for you. The results section is as long as necessary, but you must include the descriptive or inferential subsection. It doesn't have to be different paragraphs. It can be if you'd like it to be, but you're simply going to report on the average social media usage for all participants as well as standard deviation, and that's going to be here, average social media usage and standard deviation. You're also going to report on the average female score in standard deviation, that is here, and standard deviation, and here is the male usage score, the same thing. And then at the end, the inferential subsection, if you remember from APA, you have the T, and then you're going to provide degrees of freedom, which is 64, and then equals negative 0.95, and then the P is going to be 0.35. At the end, you tell us whether we failed or not to reject the null hypothesis. The discussion at the end is where you discuss any shortcomings, any drawbacks, any flaws, and any future suggestions for other studies. And this must be a one-page minimum. Keep in mind that I don't mean one paragraph, I mean one full page so you can get full credit. And at the end, you'll do your reference page. In addition to your 7 peer-reviewed journal articles, you must include this one here because it is what we used over here in this part here. Participants were treated in accordance with the ethical principles of psychologists and code of conduct. This is going to be due on October 3rd at 11:59 p.m. on Turnitin.com. Please give yourself ample time to create an account and submit in a timely fashion, as late papers will not be accepted. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. And again, I will create an account. I'll create an announcement with all the different information that you need, and the video will be there as well.